Hey everybody, welcome to TradeScope. My name is Luis Garcia and I'm a part-time trader. This is my weekly recap where I go over all the stocks that I've been trading recently. Before I get started, I have to let you know that this video is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be taken as financial advice. So, the theme continues with PRTG and Tesla. This week there was also some rumblings in INTZ, which I've been holding for a while now too. So I kind of wanted to go over some of the weekly charts on those three names and see where they're headed and maybe start planning some exits. So starting with PRTG first, some interesting things happening with them. Clinical stage news of mesothelioma treatments. It's kind of just been riding that news for a while, for a few weeks here. Another interesting thing about this stock is that it's a low float stock, so 800K in the float, I think. Different reports from different sources on the float, but it's a relatively micro float stock. And I'm just really interested in the price action. That's really where it's at. The float, the short float, and price action for these momentum stocks is really what I'm always looking at to determine what the trade is going to be like. So let's take a look at, first of all, the candlestick patterns. So you can see we have, on the first break of news back in March, big spike up to $13, sell off on very low volume back down to 550, and then a spike back from a low of 450 the following week all the way up to a high of $13. So it retested that $13 mark. As you can see, that was a pretty good resistance level for them going back to December of last year. So then again, following the pattern, sell off on very low volume. Only reached a high of $9.72. It broke that high the next week and broke the $13 mark, which was a pretty big deal, but again on low volume. And then it sold back off. So it went all the way up to $15.80 and then sold back off to close out the week at $8.45. Last week was really interesting. It opened higher, only hit a low of $9.55. So it's finding some support, right? That's a pretty big deal. Let's see if I can find a good color to point this out with. Let's do red for support. Oops. Let's try that again. Yeah, so you can see a good support line right there. And now we've got this little bit of a channel. So hit a high of $12.23. Still low volume, but a little bit more volume. And you can see what's interesting here is the curl, right? This is quintessential for these low floats, is you see a little bit of a curl, right? You see it in the price action, you see it in the volume, and you see it in the MACD, right? The momentum indicator. Still growing, right? A little bit more momentum every week. Same thing, a little bit more volume every week. So I'm guessing that this trend is going to continue next week. Would be nice if it broke this $15 mark, and if it does break this $15 mark again, I think we could be pretty confident in it testing this high. So let's go back to the cross line. This high is $23. So I think if it breaks $15 again, I think, and it has good volume, which the indications show it might, we can potentially see a break of $20 next week. And that's really what I've been looking for on the stock. So I got in with 350 shares at about $10.22. So if a $10 gain, with a $10 gain, that would be a profit of about $3,500, which would set me up really nice for the second quarter. And that's kind of what I'm looking at for this trade. But that's pretty much my exit entry criteria for PRTG. That's my technical analysis on it. So I'll leave that alone. I want to also switch over to Tesla and talk about that real quick. So something interesting happened with Tesla a couple weeks ago as well. It broke this near-term downward trend line that it had started all the way back in December of last year. And it held that trend line all the way through till 2 weeks ago at the end of April. It broke that trend line on good volume, and it continues that break through that trend line, and it's holding. So that to me shows that it's got some legs potentially for a higher move up. So last week it tested a high of 286. It had a high of 285 before that, and then the next high looking left is 291. It broke that high this week, 291. So the next high looking left would be 303. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is that window above $300. Next high after 303 would be 342. So I think the real window is all the way up to about 342, 350. That would be the best case scenario. Again, my cost basis right now is 35 shares roughly at about $282. So I figure if I can get to 332 even, that's about a $50 increase, $1,750 profit. Not bad at all for that trade. Again, sets me up nice for the second quarter. So that's kind of what I'm looking at for this one. A break into the 330, 340, 350 range. I think it's possible. I don't know. Tesla can be very volatile, so I don't know if it's going to come back down and retest that trend line first. Excuse me. It could come back down and retest that line right here. Right, that's definitely a possibility, especially if it gets some bad news. There's always news articles flying back and forth on this. That's just the name of the game when you're trading Tesla. Something else to keep in mind that I'm looking at on the weekly is more green volume than red over the past few weeks. And the momentum indicator. The momentum indicator is very important because it's starting to look like it's going to flip, right? So let's look at the last time on the weekly that it flipped. Was all the way back here, right? And look what happened when it flipped. It was right here. So this was this is when it flipped and it ripped, right? So flip and rip on the momentum scanner or on the momentum indicator. Something typically to look for. I think that potentially could happen again. We also have a pretty low RSI, which indicates it's got room to go higher. So yeah, as long as nothing volatile hits the news cycle, I think this has a potential to rip at least to like 350. I think that's very reasonable. There was a couple articles I noticed that there were still some Tesla bulls coming out of the woodworks to defend it. I don't know if I see any of them right here because it's been a lot of negative news over the past few months with Tesla in general. They have the robo-taxi thing. I know that's something that was kind of like re-emerged, the robo-taxi news. But yeah, I noticed somewhere, maybe it wasn't here, maybe it was on Google. I noticed a couple Tesla bulls coming out to defend the stock again and to defend their like, call it their price predictions on it. But anyways, that's Tesla. The last thing I wanted to touch on today was INTZ. So I got into this way back, and this was probably, was it really last year? I think it was last year. Yeah, it was the end of last year I got into it, 2024. On this big spike, I averaged down if I remember correctly, looking at the SEC filings, they're holding on to a shelf offering that they haven't completely closed out. So what that tells me is that they are looking for an opportunity to cash in on that shelf offering on another move higher. Let's draw some pictures here. So first thing to notice is that this bottom right here held pretty well. It held all the way, it never really got back to where it was before the initial spike back in 2024. So that's important to note. Something else that's important to note is, again, notice the curl. See if I could draw this again. The curl, right? It's really hard to tell, but it's the same thing's happening on the volume. You got the flip on the MACD here, right? So all signs pointing to a possible run. Let's get the cross line back out and we could kind of look at levels here. So it hit a high of 153 last week. Next high looking left is 155, so it's right there. Next high after that is 168, 186, 204, and then 242, and then 355. So it's got some resistance all along the way. I'm holding it at like a little over $4, so I don't know if it's potentially going to make it back to $4 unless it gets squeezed or something like that. But it definitely popped on my radar this past week because it was up like 20%, I think, Friday. So I don't know why, but it's been holding this. Let's see if we can do this. It's been holding this like near-term trend line pretty well. So yeah, it's interesting to see where it's going to go from here. Broke the 200 moving average on the daily. A lot of technical things setting up here. So I'm interested to see if it runs. If it doesn't run, at least potentially gives me a chance to average down or get out with less of a loss. So I'll definitely be watching it over the next couple weeks to see what it does. And yeah, that's kind of my analysis for the week. So I didn't take any trades this week. Again, just looking at my long-term plays and waiting to see how those play out, and hoping to take some profit soon. Looking for the exits. Let me know what you guys are trading. Let me know what you think of my technical analysis on some of these names that I've been looking at. And if you're looking at the same names, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. And thank you all for subscribing. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share if you liked the video. And I'll talk to you guys next week.